Thank you, everybody, for joining the OSU Leadership Center for this portion of our complimentary webinar series. We are recording this session, like I just said, in order to share it on YouTube. So you will be getting an evaluation link and a link to our YouTube video later today. I'm really happy to introduce Dr. Emily Buck, who is the co-director of the Leadership Center and a professor in the Department of Agricultural Communication, Education, and Leadership. And as I was saying that, Emily's going to share some of that information. Emily's going to be covering the topic of communicating in crisis in organizations. And so as you have questions, please put them in the chat box, and Emma Newell, our moderator, will ask them on your behalf at the end of the session. So welcome everybody, and welcome Emily.
Thank you. Yes, welcome everybody. Let's see if I can get my computer to work. As Beth said, I'm co-director of the Leadership Center, but also faculty in our department teaching agriculture communication, which, if you're not familiar, is basically a science communication. So I've got a couple degrees from the University of Florida, so I know the South well, and freezing here back in Ohio. Even though I've lived back in Ohio for 13 years, I'm still very cold. I will let you know, I live north of Columbus on a farm, actually with my husband and daughter, in Marion County. So if you don't know Ohio, it's about 60 miles north of Columbus, out in the middle of nowhere. So I will apologize now if I get a little choppy on this, and if I have to turn off my picture of myself while I'm talking, just because sometimes that helps with the Wi-Fi. I was telling Beth, I felt very vindicated last night. The Voice was on NBC, and Blake Shelton's Wi-Fi went down right at like the worst time possible, and nobody could hear him. So I felt vindicated that even NBC couldn't get those things right. So even if I can't. And I just saw somebody pop in from Knox County. I actually grew up in Knox County, so welcome from Knox County. Love that area of the state. We'll get ahead and get started. You know, we're going to talk a little bit about communicating in crisis in organizations, and I think right now we all know crisis. We've all been through a crisis more than any of us had ever expected. And so what I want to talk about today is sort of what we're going through right now, but crises in general, whether it's your organization having to close because of the CDC giving guidance, or because you know, there's a weather catastrophe, a tornado's gone through and you have to stop for a little while, or heaven forbid, some type of accident at your organization, or you know, you work for Taco Bell and one of your employees have all of a sudden posted some videos of doing something to food that they shouldn't be doing to food. There's so many types of crises out there that we can face in different organizations, and there's no set perfect way to address and to handle every crisis. I think every single one is different because every audience that you're going to be talking to is different. But one of the most important audiences through a crisis is actually that internal audience. We always think about talking to our constituents and our consumers, but that internal audience is huge because of what they can do for us as a business and an organization, but also what they can do externally for us or to us in a situation. I love this sort of graph and thinking through this. You know, if we have better internal communication, what that can do for us is have a better work environment. If people in an organization feel connected to the organization, especially in times of crisis, they're going to feel better about the company that they work for or the organization. They're going to be more engaged, and they're going to have better morale. And I see that I spelled morale wrong, so I apologize for that. I think my brain is on Zoom, and I don't always look at things right. But we have higher productivity. because people feel more bought into an organization. And I think right now, if you think about it, think about your work environment and what you've been going through right now. The more your organization or the leadership in your organization has engaged you, the better you probably feel. The better you feel emotionally, the better you feel in terms of health, the better you feel, mentally. You start having a sense of security. In a crisis like right now, where some people are worried about, their jobs, their livelihoods, if they're not being engaged, there's a lot of health issues that can come into play as they get concerned. And if we've engaged them and we've talked with them, that trust and loyalty and that morale then comes into play. And especially when we look at some of the generations that we're working with right now that are newer into our organization. So our millennial generation, our Generation Z, they are people who really need a lot of one-on-one conversation. They need that interaction. And so in a time of crisis, they especially are looking for that engagement, and it becomes really important to talk to them. Because as we all know, office gossip is a hot thing, and it is faster than a fire some days. I know even in our organization, university, every call that I'm on, the first 10 minutes is, what have you heard? What have you heard? Do you know what we're doing now? And as a leader, whether you're a top level leader, a mid-range leader, just managing just a few people, it's your job to help squelch some of that gossip that could be getting around. Especially when we think about a crisis, if we're thinking about the external piece to it, that internal piece and that internal gossip gets really hot because where do people talk and where do people vent? Well, they talk and vent online, right? So if I'm not sure what my organization's doing, but I've heard so-and-so told me that they're going to fire everybody, I might start posting on Facebook that I'm really concerned about my job. And then so-and-so from accounting goes, wait a minute, what did you hear? And it just spreads. So it's really important that when a crisis hits, we get out in front and we think about what kind of discussions are going to be had internally in the organization, and try and get in front of some of the office gossip, for lack of a better term, to make sure that the information that is being shared is information that's correct, and that is the information that we want to be shared in the organization. Part of this is being prepared before a crisis even hits. And I know the crisis that most of us are dealing with right now, this is hindsight's 2020, but we are going to continue to have crises affect our organizations from here to the end of time, right? There's always going to be something that comes up. And so this is a great chance for us to stop and think about how could we have planned better, and what could we be doing right now to plan for future crises. And part of that, a lot of organizations will have some type of crisis communication plan. And I encourage you to find out if your organization has one, to look at it, to visit it, to revisit it many times over. Things change over time, communication changes over time, your organization, your employees. So keeping it fresh and in process, knowing your employees, knowing who they are, their contact information. There's a lot of people who say that there should be some type of employee calling tree. I know even in our big organization of Ohio State, even our department has a calling tree. If this person calls this person, calls this person. And there's discussion in the business literature saying that that's a waste of hours and time when it comes to a crisis, and we shouldn't be, putting all of our time into phone calls trying to catch somebody. So, whether you agree with that or not, having that as an outlet for the people who need to know via phone, but also knowing which of your employees are going to want that information via email, which of your employees are going to want that information possibly through social media. Organizations like the Red Cross have internal apps that just do internal communication amongst their organization. So if your organization's big enough, there may be something like that app, or there's some social media sites like Yammer and some of those where it's just internal communication. Or if you have a Microsoft team, knowing how beforehand how to reach your employees is going to be help you along the road. And having it set up to where you can get information out to them very quickly in more than one format. Having your leaders prepared, knowing which leaders are going to be the ones when a crisis hits, which ones are going to be the ones sending out information, or are the right ones to send out information. If your employees know this is the person who's going to have the information and this is who I should go to, they're going to listen less to the gossip and go straight to the source. So if I know that the middle management are going to be the ones who are going to be passing out information in a crisis, that's who I'm going to go to rather than the secretary down the hall. So making sure that your employees know who are our crisis managers, or who's in charge in those situations, whether it's having a task force or just having specific people as point people already identified in your organization. And these may be people in certain situations, you use them for other things. And the other thing I'm going to say, and I'll say this throughout, even being prepared in your preparedness, thinking about your employees' health, having empathy for them in times of uncertainty, being prepared for that, pre-thinking through crises. Nobody probably could have foreseen what we're going through today, but we could have foreseen other instances where our organizations may have been shut down for a time or two. And having pre-thought through what does that mean for our employees, and the people who are internally that we're working with, what uncertainty may be coming out for them that we need to be ready to address the minute something hits. The more we can prepare, the more we plan, the quicker we will be at addressing the crisis when it does hit. Again, hindsight's 2020. It would have been wonderful if we could have all done this before the crisis now, but this gives us a chance to think through future plans. So once we hit a crisis, when it hits online or it hits the media, that's when everything sort of stops. And when if you're working in communication or you're in leadership, this is when all hands on deck, and it's time to really address it, and to address it internally. If you want to control the external narrative, you need to control the internal narrative, because people are online, people are social. When Ohio State closed down, I heard it on the news. It was like the 11:30 news. I quickly texted. I didn't text my boss. No, I texted my colleagues and said, "Did you hear this? What is going on?" I checked my email first and didn't, I went looking for that, but I went straight to social media to find out more information because I knew my colleagues would be sharing on social media. You don't want that as an organization. You want to be on the forefront. And I'm not saying Ohio State did it wrong. Ohio State did send out communications. It was just some delays in emails that caused that delay to me. But you as an organization want to make sure that you're putting out the information and they're finding out from you before they're finding out from other sources. So a lot of times we want to hold off and put out information, but we can't. Sometimes it's better to get short bits of information out when it's timely than waiting to have the whole story. All right. I am a perfectionist and I want to make sure I'm giving everybody every bit and piece of news that they need for the crisis. That's great. But when it hits and it's at burst, you, again, want to control the narrative internally and externally. So you've got to get out there ahead of it. So sending out even a short, we know that this has happened. We know what's going on. Please know that you're going to get more information about this as soon as we have it, or as quickly as we can. You know, that will help you squelch some of that social media discussion that's going to happen, some of that office gossip. If people know that, wait, we're going to be getting more information here, they're coming to give us more, but just we need to hold on. That helps, and that's something that throughout the crisis really should continue. Continuing to give, you know, updates no matter what. If we don't have every piece of information, keep doing that. You know, our organization right now, as you know, you may or may not know, Ohio State hasn't decided what we're doing for fall semester yet, but we are continually, I probably every other day, I'm getting something saying, we're still figuring this out. These are the things we're talking about. So there's, you know, staying in front of that discussion becomes important, even when we don't know all the facts. And as communicators, especially, we always want to make sure we're giving everything to everybody, and we have to let go of that sometimes. You know, as it progresses, the biggest thing that you need to do is keep everybody in the loop. Keep your employees knowing. You know, telling them, you know, reminding them what are the vision and the mission of your organization. What's the values? Reminding them, as you're telling them what you're doing to address the crisis, letting them know what you're doing externally, but reminding them how you're doing this based on what your organization stands for. What that does is it helps them when they go to put things out externally. They may second guess and go, this is what our value and our mission is, so I probably shouldn't be saying this, or I should be communicating these kinds of things because this is really what we're trying to say. So that helps you coordinate messages. Letting them know what you're going to say externally, giving them the facts, that's going to help, again, with that external narrative as they go out. Making sure your leaders are on board. Your higher up leaders, a lot of times in crisis communications, we say that the external facing person needs to be one of the leaders, the CIO or the CEO of the organization, and they need to be the ones out there talking for the organization. Internally as well, you want to have your leadership talking to the employees and letting them know that this is what's happening. But again, empowering middle level leadership as well to answer the little questions and to make sure everybody's feeling like they're bought into the situation. Keeping tabs on the employees throughout the process is really important as well. Polling them, asking them how they're feeling, what are their concerns. Hopefully your organizations have done that over these last few weeks, saying, you know, how has your life changed, or how has your work environment changed? Even informal polling can be very, very helpful. I saw a comment on here saying, what suggestions for balance with small information versus waiting for the complete picture? It is a balance, but it's better to give the small bits of information and say, we're coming with more information, than being quiet and letting the wrong information spread like wildfire, right? So it's better to give the small bits and pieces as you can. Having some type of central data location for people to go to. Like I said, the Red Cross sort of has an app that they use. There's several organizations that do that. Our organization did some websites within the first week. They had websites that they were publicizing to students, faculty, staff, external audiences, but they had internal websites. And it may not be a website, it may be a Microsoft Teams spot, it may be just a central person in your organization. This is the one to go to if you have questions, but having something that people know that they can go back to if they do have questions. And again, empathy for your employees. Internally, you've got to really think about your employees and uncertainty, and think through that right now during a crisis, if your organization shut down, or let's say you work for a food organization and there's listeria, and so you're facing media right now, or somebody got hurt in a plant. People are going to have questions, and you're going to need to address internally while you're addressing the crisis. So people wonder, am I going to lose my job? Will my hours be cut? You know, are we going to make it through this crisis? For COVID, am I going to be sick at work? Am I safe? What benefits am I going to lose? You know, where do I find resources for my family? As an organization, if you think back to that first slide, if we have good communication, it brings goodwill and good feelings towards the organization, and it helps that relationship building, which helps us build our organization around and eventually, you know, helps with productivity. If people are worrying about these things, they're not going to be worrying about the job that they need to be doing. So we need to keep these things in mind as we work through the crises that we're dealing with. You know, in some organizations will quickly put out stuff for family, friends. I know some organizations, if there's a tornado that happened in, say I work in Ohio, but there was a tornado in Florida or a hurricane. I know some organizations who will look to see if employees have family members in Florida who may have been affected by the hurricane, to know, are their employees affected in some way? So being forward thinking during the crisis and thinking about where are your employees right now mentally through this process, and letting them see you. The more you can let your internal audience see you in person is best, especially with that millennial generation that sort of, you know, makes up a lot of our younger workforce right now. They want to see that. It's comforting to them to see the person with that information. And it may not be that you can do one-on-one, face-to-face, but videos. If not a video, having that weekly email or daily email. I know our organization for a while was doing daily emails, and that was comforting to know that information was coming out. You know, and we see that government right now doing our daily, our governor does daily, the president does daily updates. It's, you know, psychologically that is helpful for people as they mentally deal with a crisis. So the more you can be out there, the more they can see you, the more they're going to feel that relationship and confidence in what you're saying to them. In terms of the actual message that you're putting out there, we are inundated with stuff. No matter what type of crisis hits, we've got too many emails, we've got too many texts, and in a crisis, you're trying to deal with your work, but you're also trying to deal with whatever's happening. So people don't want long emails with tons of information. They need bullet points. You know, 75 words is sort of that maximum what they're going to remember and what they're going to take in. So having it be short and brief, using chunking in your language and your paragraphs to help people see what they need quickly. I know personally, when I get those long emails from our administration, I scan down and I see the bullet points, I read those, and then I'm like, okay, maybe I'll go back and read the long paragraph if I have time. Being brief is going to be helpful. When you do your messaging, it's okay to say that you're not sure what's happening right now. It's okay to say these may be different scenarios that we could be facing, and this is what we're thinking in these scenarios. You know, I know for us right now, I've continually heard, we may do this, or we may do this in the fall. And that's not giving your employees an answer, but it's giving them something to grasp onto, to feel like there is movement and that there's some positivity coming through the crisis, and gives them that. So again, when they go externally, they can say positive things about the organization. You know, giving them chance to have a dialogue with you. Remember, through all of this has to be a dialogue. They've got to have a chance to come back to you and ask questions. And thinking social, putting stuff out on social to your internal audiences, but also giving them things that they can put out on social is important. And one of the last things in terms of during the crisis, we think a lot about talking to our internal audiences about what's happening through a crisis, what we're doing, how we're addressing COVID, or how we're addressing the hurricane that just took out some of our locations. that's important that we help them get through that, but it's also important to remind them how to continue to do their job at that time. What do we expect of them in terms of the normal? What do we expect the same amount of work? Are we expecting, we're okay with productivity to go down during this time? Maybe they need to focus on this part of their job a lot more right now and let this other part of their job slide. Not only giving them the facts, but also reminding them that that they're worried about the job that they have to do too, and what you're expecting as an administrator or a leader or an employer of them will also help with some of that mental health and some of that understanding of where they need to go. And then as a crisis ends, you don't want to stop talking. A crisis may stop. COVID may go away all of a sudden. I wish, but I don't think that's going to happen. But after a hurricane, things get fixed, or after an accident at your factory, things go back to normal. But you've got to keep talking with the employees and your internal group to make sure that they're comfortable and they understand what's happened. And that gives you a chance to evaluate. It gives you a chance to see what went well. What did your employees in that internal audience think you did right? What did you do wrong? What did you miss? And having, whether it's polling or surveying or interviewing or just those one-on-one conversations between leadership and employees, having some type of evaluation that allows you to go back to that beginning plan. And how are you going to pivot for the next crisis that might come out? How do you move forward? And how do you train? How do you train people in those situations to deal with social media? You may find that you have a social media issue with your employees where they're all talking. Maybe that means you need to have some social media training of what do we want to share about our organization online, or what do we expect from you in that type of situation. I feel like I ran through that, but these are 30-minute fun little bits of information. So that's sort of a quick synopsis of what you need to be thinking about as you're communicating through crises. But does anybody have any questions, thoughts?
Yeah, so please be sure to put your questions into the chat box. We currently have one open question, Dr. Buck, and they would like you to elaborate on when you said to control the external narrative, you must control the internal narrative. And do you have any examples for that?
I'm trying to think of an exact example. I think what I mean by that is, if you want, I'll use Ohio State for an example, and this is completely hypothetical. If I wanted, if all of the faculty go out and start talking about we're not going to have classes this fall, we're all going to be online, and we start putting that out, social media, the media will pick that up, and then that becomes the external narrative. People are going to start seeing a lot of people talking about that. They share it, and then people start believing, because people unfortunately all believe exactly what they see online some days. So they might not, they're not waiting to hear from the organization itself. So if you can stop some of that external discussion by your employees that is wrong before it goes out, you're better managing what's going out to that external audience. I don't know how to say that in clear. For example, Taco Bell, I think, had a crisis a couple years ago where several of the employees were doing things to food, and they posted it on social media, and it went real viral really quick. And for an organization like that to talk to their employees quickly, to talk about the importance of food safety and food concerns and health and food preparation, before they start going on social media and going, we do this in our business, and sharing things that maybe were negative that they didn't want out there. If they could have stopped that from snowballing, it would help them on the long run with their consumers. So I hope that clarifies that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And a follow-up question to that is, could this be applied to the COVID situation, specifically to groups that do not feel that they should wear masks and feel their rights are being taken away?
Yeah, definitely. I think, that alone it's a sub crisis, I'm sure, of this larger crisis. And I think we're going to have a lot of these little sub crises as an organization we're going to have to deal with. But the organization being clear of why you're making the decisions you're making, and being on that forefront. And again, not waiting, you don't have to wait for every little fact, but giving them as you're making the decisions and how you're making the decisions and why, can help with that. But it again then goes back to what's your empathy with your employees and where are they coming from. I think I put in our handout, remembering your time as an employee. When you put out information, how would you have read the information you just put out? How would you have taken that message? What would you have looked into it? What would you have read into it? Would you have seen it as positive or negative? So thinking through how you would have seen it can be helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Buck. And I think that is all of the questions that have been put into the chat box as of now. If you think of anything else, please be sure to put it in that chat box, and then we can go ahead and answer that either after this webinar, or we can reach out to you individually. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Beth for our conclusion.
Okay, this concludes our session for today. And once again, this presentation will be made available on YouTube, so you'll be able to go back and look at this. Somebody did ask that question that they want to share it in their state, so it will be available, and so will the handout. We hope to see you at future webinars. We're slowly adding, we're set through June 10th. So go to our website to register, and we have instructions on our website how to add to your registration. It's a little bit of a different process than when you first registered. And then finally, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn for current updates. And we're sharing tips and positive quotes and things to get you, help you through this very uncertain time. And so check us out. Have a good day, everybody.
Yeah, everybody have a great day. Thank you.
And Dr. Buck, did you have a minute to answer another question that was placed in the chat box?
Yep.
Larry Davis